It is the single most requested topic for this channel. You are not the only helicopter simulator pilot going through this. I'm going to take you through three different methods of sensitivity settings to help improve your helicopter skills with a focus on your cyclic control. And the goal here is to go from something like this, know what I mean, to something a little more like this. Nice. So, let's fly. And for this one, we are in the trusty Gambale Cabri G2 in the default scenery at Mount Beauty in southeastern Australia. Pretty benign conditions. You can see the wind there is variable, about 3 knots. Essentially the default weather. So I'm not using live weather today. We'll keep this nice and simple. And welcome aboard. So I'm going to talk about 3 styles or 3 levels of sensitivity in our helicopter controllers. I'm going to start with level 1. Keep it simple at the start. So I'm going to go up to our controls up here. Now, if you're coming from general aviation and you have controls that you like, you could duplicate those. Give them a name. As you can see, I call mine Helicopter General. You give them a new name and then start adapting so that you don't spoil your fixed wing sensitivity if that's what you want to retain. So I'll just get these out of the way first. Here's my throttle, my old CH Products Pro throttle. Hardware settings. Okay, in here, the one we're interested in is the Z axis. That's where the main throw of this controller goes to the collective control in the helicopter. Now, if I take my hand off that, you can see I've got a bit of jitteriness in this controller. Probably I can get some Windows applications to help make this less reactive. But what I've done, just to keep all of this default, let's say, is that I've just introduced sufficient extremity deadzone so that when the cyclic is all the way down, or the throttle is all the way down, this jitteriness is not being transferred through into the helicopter. So if I had this higher, or at 0, you can just see the actual collective control in the machine is just bouncing up and down there. I don't want that, so I'll just introduce sufficient extremity deadzone so that that's not the case. Now, this might also be the issue with some centering joysticks as well. You might want to get out a bit of dead zone in the middle of your range. Alright, so next I use nice pedals, these Thrustmaster pendular pedals. So these ones, it's the Z axis again that we're concerned with. It's very helpful here in Sim Update 1 of 2024 that we've got the indicator on this scale here so that I can see what my range of motion is doing. With these good modern high resolution controllers, I want to have everything flat. I want linear controls so that the same amount of extra deflection is applied right across the range of my feet on these pedals. Good. Which brings me to the star of the show today, because I am focusing on cyclic for the most part. The rather elderly, but still giving good service, Microsoft Sidewinder Force Feedback 2 joystick. I'm not using the force feedback controls, it's not plugged in, that's why it's flashing. This is pretty low resolution by today's standards. I'm saving up for new controllers. If you are feeling fabulously wealthy, you could always give me a super thanks to speed along this process. Otherwise, I'm perfectly happy to do it the old-fashioned way. So hopefully in 2025, I'll be getting new ones of these, and we'll be able to show you some more modern controllers. Alright, so in the antique Sidewinder Force Feedback 2, hardware settings, right, so it's the X and Y axis that I'm concerned with here. So there's my X and there's my Y, and you can see that by default we're starting with a linear curve here. Now, for helicopter beginners, that's going to be too sensitive. Look, it's some would say you should learn the most realistic way possible. I say make it easy on yourself at first. For absolute beginners who are struggling to do anything with the helicopter with all of the assistances off, I recommend you do something like this. Get these down to even 0.7 on both the plus and the minus here. Now, what this means is that that looks like I feel like I'm doing about halfway along on the deflection on the stick, but I'm only getting about 20% of the input, 20% of the way along the input, which means I get a lot more resolution in the center of the range. And that's going to be helpful for when you're learning things like hovering. So let's give this a go first. That's the Y. You've got to remember to adjust both axes here. So 0.7 and minus 0.7 and minus 0.7. And that looks like we're good to go. So put that away and get my trusty input viewer up as well from flightsim.to. There's a link in the video description. Reset my head tracking here. And let's try to get to a hover. And for a hover, I'm going to need, on the empty Cabri, forward and right, and I need a bit of right pedal as well, considerable right pedal in fact in this machine. So let's start to bring up the collective. Here it comes. What's going to happen with this very low sensitivity set? We're getting light, a little bit too much right pedal perhaps because I can see it nudging that way. Need more right cyclic to counteract that, and we're off the ground with a bit of a pivot there. I'll try and get back onto the head of that arrow. This for me is very wafty, but it might be good for people who are struggling with just how very sensitive helicopters are. Just touch the ground there, tiny bit more on the collective. Right, so as I'm talking to you, I am floating around a bit. So concentrate on the middle distance, keep the attitude stable, watching for any floating to the left and right, and we're reasonably stable now. Good. I'm going to come forward and I'll just show you a little exercise I can do here at Mount Beauty Airport, because there's some convenient cones over here. So as user-friendly as this is for beginners, it's a little bit, I don't know, what's the word? Wafty? Is that a word? For me, but I'm dealing with it. So you can do little experiments like this. You could try and do something around this shape over here. Do a turn about the nose, or a turn about a point. So this is where we want to have, we're going to be using left pedal, but introducing right cyclic to get around that. So that's done in that direction, and let's try it over here as well. The helicopter feels very soft with this level of sensitivity. I feel like I'm going okay here. It's just maybe, you see stuff like that where it's easy for me to put in a little bit too much. I mean, that's a risk at any sensitivity level, but I feel like I might have got that back on track faster with more sensitive controls. But on the other hand, as I say, when you're learning, this I think is where I would recommend you begin, especially if you've got a very lightly sprung or non-centering stick. Okay, I'm going to gently pop this down, and that's okay. Just keeping a note there on the input view of where my settings are. Good, that's feeling fine. Pop back up again. I'll get it back up on the numbers on the runway. Translate this way, and we will do, I suppose, another turn about the nose here to explore our next sensitivity setting. I'd love to know how you go with these. So if we call this level 1, which is low sensitivity, tell me how you're going with this and if it's helping you. Another turn about the nose here. Oh yes, so just need to arrest that amount of translation there. Kicking up the dust. Try and get right back on the head of this arrow. Pointing back up runway 32 here at Mount Beauty. Stable hover, hopefully. And lowering the collective. Don't be jiggling up and down the collective as you land or take off. One direction only, down. And that was pretty good. Lowering the collective all the way down. And now we're at 0 on the collective, and not quite straight, but I'll take that. Thank you. Okay, let's call this next one level 2. I'm going to call this the Extremity Deadzone method. So back into the controls, back into our collective controller, hardware settings. So I'm just going to reset everything here, and remember, you got to do both axes each time, so get that back there. Right, now this time I'm going to show you what the Extremity Deadzone would be like. I'm going to start it about here, 0.4 and 0.4. So this looks kind of counterintuitive. People will look at this and go, well, hang on, don't you need that? You know, I'm chopping off some of the potential input by doing this. And people will ask, well, don't you need that? Typically, no. Like, we don't need to be deflecting the stick fully in typical helicopter operations. So I don't need that for the most part. There is a small caveat to that with the Cabri. So have I got 0.4 on both sides there? Good. All right. So the benefit of this method is that I get the same amount of deflection or input across the range of motion. So it doesn't speed up as you get further along, but I've still overall reduced the sensitivity by taking out the extremity by this degree. Okay, let's just try it. Let's just try it. I mean, already I kind of like what it's like in the middle. And by the way, this could be good for controllers that are more heavily sprung centering controllers, because it means that you're going to get more deflection in the middle of the range, which means you're not going to have to be pushing out so much against the springs the whole time. Might be less tiring on your hands, okay? So consider that. All right, let's get this going again. Do the same exercise. Try and get up into a stable hover here. Have I got the settings right here? Bit too much right pedal. That's looking better now. Oh, that's a better pickup than the last one. Why didn't I start with this one? I'm already liking this more. This is where I've been typically running it in recent times with the Extremity Deadzone. And I just feel that's actually easier to achieve a stable hover now that I am a familiar enough simmer to know what I need to do with the cyclic and not over control it. So this is why I'm calling this level 2. I mean, you could try starting here. If it's still too twitchy for you, then you go back to level 1. So level 2, the Extremity Deadzone. I'm finding this quite nice compared to the first method. Okay, let's do the same sort of maneuvers here. Someone brought their citation jet to Mount Beauty. Nice. Okay, so coming up a bit fast there. All right, let's just try and do our gentle orbit of this shape here. Okay, not controlling it beautifully there, but that's pilot skill rather than sensitivity here, I think. I need to just get a bit closer at risk of bumping into those trees behind me. Yeah, interesting. That might have been a bit more easily achieved with the previous sensitivity setting, but I'm getting the feel for it now, and this is already looking better, this going back in this direction. Getting a bit fast, so I use the right cyclic to cancel out that speed of translation. I needed a bit more collective there to not hit the ground. And there we go. These maneuvers can be trickier when there's a bit of wind as well, because you'll go in and out of effective translation or lift. Okay, that's nice, and you know, we can just practice with our little bits of translation here as well. I'm finding that pretty good because I get direct controls in the center of the range, but it's not grossly oversensitive. So, okay, let's pop back down here again. For default scenery, this is pretty good. Yeah, I think this came out in a world update in 2020. not the year 2020, but the the simulator 2020, at least a couple of years ago. Okay, let's do our turn about the nose here again, or turn about a point. Get back onto the head of this arrow, cancel that out. That was a bit better this time. Erasing the dust, okay. And getting back onto the head of the arrow. Notice that I've got my hand this time resting on the base of the stick. So you might find that good to keep the weight, keep your arm's weight off the controller. Reducing the collective. Skidded slightly along there, but that's a pretty nice landing, I think. And oh, it's even better than the first one. Okay. At the moment, for me, with my setup, this Extremity Deadzone method is level 2, as I'm dubbing it in this video, is working quite nicely for me. Alright, I want to talk about something, a bit of a blend here. I'm going to call this level 2.5. So in this level 2.5, back into my joystick here, okay, it's a mix of the first two. So if you want a bit more extremity available to you, you could reduce this to, let's say, 0.3. I'll try 0.25. No, I'll change my mind. 0.3. 0.3 and 0.3. You can use this in combination with a bit of sensitivity reduction. So you get something like this. So I've got 0.3, 0.3, 0.3, 0.3, 0.3, 0.3. And what this does is it gives me a little bit more linearity in the middle of the range, but does allow me to access a little bit more of the extremity. And you can just experiment with this and get it the way you think it might be good for you. In fact, now that I look at that, maybe 0.25 would be good. So get that the same on both axes. Good. And I'll just give you a quick run with this one. I'll show you why this is important. Well, why it's useful in the Cabri. So we'll lift up here again. This time I'm going to be just getting a bit of speed up along the runway. Okay, that's a similar feel to level 2, level 2.5. So this time I'm not going to do my little exercise down there. I'm going to pitch down, increase power, and we'll get some speed up. Now, the reason this could be good is that notice I need quite a bit of nose down deflection to get the Cabri moving along here. So that might be tricky with level 2, as I called it. So that's why a blend of more Extremity Deadzone but slightly less sensitivity might work well for you. Alright people, this is the ultimate level 3. The scary one. Alright, this is what we're going to do here is we are going to zero everything on our cyclic. So both axes, remember to do that. So this is 1-to-1 linear. Now, you'll think, Matthew, you're crazy. You will not be able to fly this machine. And you could be right about that. But this is something I would actually recommend for when you're getting more experience. And if you've got a modern stick with maybe a long extension so that you can do very fine movements with a nice smooth action in the middle of the range, so no clunking into a detent in the middle or anything like that, this is when I would start to recommend this linear sensitivity across the range. Let's just see what it's like here. Oh boy, look at that. Look how fast the input viewer moves around now. Wow. All right. Good. At least my pedals are still the same as they've been all along. Raising the collective. Here we go. What's going to happen? Gulp. Again, too much pedal. There we go. There it is. Oh boy. All right. Relax. Get my hand back down here would be better. I mean, this is the most realistic way, but this would be awfully challenging for someone who's new to helicopters, I would think, in the simulator. I think you can see what the difference here is, right? Like, I'm not getting smooth translations, but I am kind of achieving the result, right? In fact, maybe if I try to do less. There we go. Try to do fewer inputs and let the machine speak to you and see what it wants to do. wants to move right, so I introduce left. Wants to go back, I bring it forward, but then cancel that so we don't go further forward. Right, not too bad. Okay, we just touched the ground there again. Tiny bit more collective. Yes, so this is the challenge. This is the challenge. Let's go and try my turnabout the nose down here. It's got all the authority in the world available to me there. I don't need to be pushing forward the stick massively to be moving forwards down the runway. Okay, slow down please. Nose up. Collective up now. Don't hit the ground and roll over, that'd be bad. Get around here. Thank you, scenery designers, for putting in these helpful experiments for us. Yeah, don't hit those trees. That's why I've got crash detect off. Okay, not great. So we just popped onto the ground there for a second. Okay, let's try this thing. Oh boy, it is feather light, the touch on this thing now. I mean, the stick, am I deflecting that by a millimetre at a time? Hardly anything. You just have to think it and it moves. The helicopter, that is. I mean, this is a bit like how I've done an intro flight in a Cabri, a real life one, and the stick is very sensitive. Like you're not doing a massive amount of deflection upon it. Okay. That squawker is outside my real life place here. That's a little bit annoying. It's not something coming from inside the helicopter. All right. Look, I'm achieving the goals here. I'm achieving the objectives. I don't want to bang onto the ground once more. Good, okay. With this high sensitivity, it is very challenging. Tiny movements only are required. And this is, I suppose, the ultimate test of your helicopter skill. Not recommended for beginner. Well, you could try it as a beginner and go, well, that's too much. But then you've got the other options available to you. Okay, let's pop back over to the start once more and see if I can get it down where it needs to go. I mean, I do like the linearity of the completely flat response there, but it's hard work on this old stick at my skill level, such as it is. Right, how not to overcorrect here. I do want to come forward, but I don't want to go too fast. That's where I've been speeding up at about that point in the maneuver. Right, that's better. And forward, back on to the head of the arrow. Get into a stable hover first, don't just whack, whoa, like I was about to do there, don't whack it onto the ground from that position. Try and get into a stable hover here. They say all helicopter flights start and end with a stable hover. So, with our very high sensitivity here, let it settle down now. Yeah, not perfect, but not too bad. How do they do? Oh, come on, that's actually one of the better ones. Now, I have two small bonus tips for you. If you're still finding it tricky to hover the helicopter, even on one of the lower levels of sensitivity that I showed you, consider this. Come into the tablet for the machine here. So I've just hit the tab key for that. I've come into the aircraft tab. I've come into flight performances, I've come into mass and balance, and I'm looking at this, mass and balance. This is how on the fly, we can adjust the weight of the machine. So the goal here is it normally spawns in, it's coming with full there actually, it normally spawns in with half a full tank, and we're still somewhat under our maximum here, so let's bring that right up to just under the maximum. Remember, in hot and high conditions, you will want that to be not at the maximum, otherwise you will have somewhat reduced performance. All right, so we'll load that in there. So now our helicopter is heavier, and you're going to find that makes for a smoother hovering experience. The machine will have a bit more inertia, it will have a bit less twitchiness. It's worth trying just to see if that's the one crucial aspect that makes a difference for you in developing your skills. And remember, if you are getting value out of these tips, you know what to do. Give me a like, give me a subscribe, and comment anyway. Tell me how you're going with all of this. Are these tips working for you? Is this making your helicopter flying easier? Have you got an even greater scheme you want to share with us? Please leave a comment for those. Okay, and last thing, I just want to talk about your progression as a helicopter flight simmer. Just because you find a setting in here that works for you today, it doesn't mean that that's what you're going to stick with for all time. So, like, if you found that you were able to get better control of the helicopter like this with using that level 2 method, the Extremity Deadzone method, what you might consider doing after you feel your skills have reached a point where you're feeling a bit more comfortable, maybe reduce this a little bit. Maybe take it from point 4 to point 3 or to point 2. So you're giving yourself a progression. You're making it, well, not harder exactly, but you're taking advantage of the new skills that you have developed, and you're able to fold those into a slightly more challenging simulator environment. Okay, I really hope you've got lots of great stuff from this video. I really look forward to seeing you in another one real soon. Take care and happy flying!